Hello and welcome to the No Fear podcast. Today's guest is Louis Shulman, founder of Orbit Metrics. We discuss his journey into entrepreneurship, his stint at Bitcoin Magazine, and working alongside Anthony Pompliano. You'll even get a couple of mental tips along the way to get ahead in life. We really think you'll like this episode. Enjoy.
Welcome to the No Fear podcast with your hosts, Noah and Ophir, where we sit down to discuss the journeys of accomplished young professionals who have taken action towards manifesting a career and a life that go far beyond the ordinary. Each week, we bring to you a young professional currently achieving success in entrepreneurship, STEM or other forward-thinking, innovative sectors. Please enjoy today's episode of the No Fear podcast, brought to you by House & Hughes, shophouseandhughes.com, the perfect destination for thousands of curated wall art designs.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the No Fear podcast. Today we've got a very special guest with us today, Louis, joining us from Scottsdale, Arizona. To jump right into it, Louis, you're an entrepreneur, I'm an entrepreneur. I want to hear about your journey. How did you get to where you are today?
I could start at a number of places, but first of all, thank you for having me. I think really where this starts, I guess, that's relevant for me in terms of like a series of beliefs changing in my head would probably be in the summer of 2018. So that's when I was doing my first software internship in kind of after college. So I was a freshman starting in 2017, and then I did my freshman year of college, kind of did the whole, I'd say, traditional path for just, not like any questioning alternatives. And then around that time, I was living abroad and doing a lot of reading of different books and different travel websites. And that's kind of when I encountered the idea of the kind of modern entrepreneur in terms of not just the, because I say up until I'd finished high school and really up until that summer, I only had a very one-dimensional notion of entrepreneurship, meaning like the short-term model is the only type of viable way that business exists is you have an idea for a physical product or opening a retail store, the things that you see on Shark Tank more often, or you have an app idea and you use that to sell in a store and you have customers in a very traditional sense. That is entrepreneurship. And I was kind of like, well, that's cool if you have an idea that fits into one of those buckets, of which I never really felt like I had. I've had some experience kind of when, like in my early teens, I did have like side hustles in elementary and middle school, but not like substantial ones. Like I was a big duct tape wallet guy. I made, several hundreds of dollars selling those in middle school, like 20, 30 bucks a pop. But that was more so just, I don't know, it's just something to do. It was like artistic expression, you could say, as well. And I just wanted to be able to afford the duct tape.
So early on, obviously going through school, when that hustler comes out, that's when you know it's going to be an entrepreneur later in life. You actually bring up a point that Noah and I were discussing earlier today, ironically enough, how the modern phrase of entrepreneurship has been hijacked generally by startups, VC. You think of companies like Google or Apple or Snapchat, where ironically enough, a majority of entrepreneurs are not in technology. And the bootstrapping method is something that doesn't necessarily yield $1 billion return, but what it yields is a great lifestyle and great income in perpetuity after a lot of hard years of work, obviously. So how do you look at bootstrapping rather than venture back? Like, what's been the approach for you in your road in entrepreneurship and then building the software business that you're building now?
Yeah, I think that, entrepreneurship is really broad. I think like it's kind of tragic how broad the word is, because two people can be having a conversation about entrepreneurship and be speaking about completely different things. And for me, the kind of risk reward profile that I found the most attractive, kind of given my interests and life goals, the VC model, I didn't think was best, at least where I am right now in life, right? So I am not someone who is going after, at least I don't think it's that important to me to be like, and again, the word obnoxious is also very vague, but I don't feel the need to become like obnoxiously wealthy early in life. Like I'm someone who's like, I want to be comfortable. I want to afford high quality food. I want to live in a nice and safe place, but I don't need to have the most money out of everyone that I know, right? I don't need to have the status of like the most followers out of anybody that I know. Nor do I care, again, to like have like the nicest of everything. I do want to have like a very high quality lifestyle, but that I do not need to be like exorbitantly wealthy. That's not like at all my life goal in terms of like, there's a certain threshold of income. I think it's higher than, there's a certain threshold of income and there's a certain threshold of lifestyle. I think the VC path is very much about like, you don't make very much money. There's a low probability that you make a ton of money several years down the line if you have a liquidation event for your company. And the bootstrapping model is, I want to consistently make a healthy amount of money, right? for the next several years, potentially as soon as this year, right? Like potentially from day one, I'm making some money and I can support myself and I'm autonomous. So the things that draw me to entrepreneurship is less about this vessel for like exorbitant amounts of income and more so just making a healthy income. But I really don't feel like I need to earn more than your average lawyer or doctor. Like I feel like that level of income would get me like a lifestyle I'd be pretty happy with. But it's also that level of income, but I do not want your average workload of a doctor, lawyer, or the average like inflexibility in terms of having to still answer to a hospital, or if you're running your own practice, still having to be in the same physical location for many hours of the day. And so I'm drawn to entrepreneurship from like I hate to use the term, I have like a tweet out there that's like, I need to spend an extra 15 minutes in the gym every time I say one of these like kind of cliche podcast buzzwords like first principles. But from like a first principles perspective, like what I really am motivated by is like the autonomy and the flexibility and the opportunity to earn the same as like a traditionally high earning career path, but completely on my own terms, completely location independent. And again, structured around a company around my values and my beliefs and my principles.
Awesome, man. Ophir and I have talked about this concept of the inertia of action, or you need a certain amount of influence or a certain amount of motivation before something makes you take that first step. What was kind of the last, straw that broke the camel's back that pushed you to get out of the marketing world and to pursue something on your own? Yeah,
I think specifically leaving my last traditional role, what motivated me to do that, I'd say, again, I agree with your theory. I think it's also sometimes a combination of multiple things, right? So it's like, this was the catalyst, right? It's like talking about World War I, and I'm no historian, right? But everyone's like, well, World War I was caused by like the Archduke getting murdered. It's like, not really. It's like, that was the catalyst that was the final thing. That was what pushed it over the edge. But it was like, the preconditions were already there. I'd say like the most specific thing that happened is I had wanted to take on a side project when I was at my last job. And they basically said, that's cool if you want to do that, but we want you fully committed here. And that project seems a bit too substantial. And we're kind of worried that if you take that on, you won't be able to perform at your abilities. And there was definitely an argument that they were totally correct about that. And like maybe I was pretty busy and I was already spread pretty thin, and maybe they were totally right and more aware of my limitations than I was.
Do you think you would have been able to do it without telling them, or would that have just caused too much of a rift?
That's just not my operating style. I don't know. Like, I don't know if you're obligated to tell your employer about side projects. Like, I didn't have like an operating agreement in place that explicitly said that I was. But first of all, I'm not the guy who's good at that kind of stuff, nor do I want to be. Like, I just have no desire to carry with me the weight of like living in the gray area. I don't know. I just prefer sleeping well over trying to skirt the edges of ethical or unethical behavior. And I don't really have like an opinion on if anyone else is moonlighting secretly or not. But for me, I'm very much like a permission first kind of guy, for better or for worse, which you don't hear a lot from entrepreneurs, right? It's like a very non-entrepreneur tendency to like be a natural rule follower. But, I was a very good student. I was good at like checking the boxes and jumping through the hoops. And so basically they're like, we're not comfortable with you taking on this project. And, I kind of believed that was my mistake to make for myself. Basically, I was like, okay, well, this project isn't so lucrative that I'm going to quit my job so that I can take it on. I was frustrated that I was effectively told no, which was fine. Again, I think like self-aware, they were completely right that I was at capacity and it would not have been a good idea for it to take them on. But again, I was like, that's my mistake to make. Let me screw up, let me underperform, and fire me for underperforming. Like, I wanted to go through that journey. I was like, if that's a lesson I need to learn, let me go through that journey. But it was that in combination with effectively realizing that what I liked best about the job was not what they most needed me to do. Like, it was a startup, it was in a growth stage, and they specifically needed me to do a set of things that I kind of wanted to do other stuff for. And I was presented with an opportunity more entrepreneurially to do those other skills. So it's kind of like a no-brainer.
So if I understand this right, this was a side project within the business that you were working, or was it your own side project that then turned into your business today?
I think none of the above, technically, would be the answer. I had a woman had reached out to me who wanted me to do something very similar to what I was doing for the company I was working for. And I thought I had the capacity to do it. So that project will likely actually still happen now, but it's still in negotiations several months later. That's kind of all. I hate to be so ambiguous. I like to share very transparently, but for things that are still not settled, done deals, I do not want to be on air saying this may or may not happen. But anyway, I was approached to like help consult for someone on a project, and it's still in discussions if I'm going to do that. But at the same time, my now co-founder for Orbit Metrics was also working on scaling Orbit Metrics. So when he was like, hey, I'm actually making enough to pay you like a modest base salary if you want to come be my co-founder here. So like you can afford rent and food, but not much more. And by the way, if that consulting project that you wanted to do, but they said you couldn't do, comes through, let's take that on and route it through this business. And so if that project comes through, it will be encapsulated and accounted and bookkeeping through the same business entity that I'm currently in.
Gotcha. Okay. So one complaint that I often hear about people who like to be entrepreneurs, it's like, where do I start? Now, you're describing a scenario where you have a client from day one. How did you find that client?
So the way my business partner found the first client for a current business, and the business is Orbit Metrics. We do data and analytics consulting for a variety of businesses. Right now, our specialty is e-commerce brands and marketing agencies. That's more of a context than it is a sales pitch. I hope it came across that way. But
Give the pitch.
we do like a fractional chief data officer service, do outsourced business intelligence, things like that. And so my business partner was working as effectively the executive assistant to a CEO of a house of e-commerce brands. So someone who was a former marketing agency guy, so he got really good at growing online brands, decided he wanted to keep all the upside, so he's going to launch his own online consumer packaged goods, direct-to-consumer online brands, and spin them all up under one roof. What's that?
Yeah. Roll-up company. Okay.
A roll-up, but not making acquisitions, but starting them all from zero.
That's tough. That's impressive.
Yes, so they're doing well, I think. I don't know. I have to check in with them. But definitely big ambition. But they raised money. They weren't trying to bootstrap. Trying to bootstrap, that would be a nightmare, right? But they raised money from venture capital, so they had ad budgets and they had ability to make really beautiful websites and to make nice creative and to kind of do things right from day one. And they were spending money everywhere on a ton of ad campaigns on every platform, right? Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, like anywhere you can buy ads. And my business partner was also a technical background, did computer engineering in college, among other things. And he basically had built them a dashboard. He's like, guys, you're asking me to make more sales, and I need to know some answers to some very basic questions. Like, what is our average order value when we buy ads on this platform? What does it need to be profitable based on the CPMs on that platform? What are the demographics? What all of the basic questions you need to make effective purchasing decisions when it comes to buying ads on digital platforms. And they were just kind of spending money everywhere. And he's like, guys, we need everything in one place. We need it fully automated. We need to be able to check it daily. And so he kind of took it upon himself, even though he was just in an EA role, to build that dashboard. And then when they had hired, so he built it, right, learned SQL, learned a bunch of other stuff they didn't really teach him in school. And when they had hired an SEO consultant to come in and basically outsource one of the channels, the SEO consultant was like, well, what is the lifetime value of your customer? What is your average order value? What is your average time on site? So he could basically have a budget to do the work that he was doing. And maybe he was a PPC consultant, so because that would make more sense. That'd be more of a actual tangible, computable metric. But he came in and they basically said, here you go. These are the answers to all of your questions. He was blown away. He was like, this is the first time I've ever worked with a brand that knew their numbers when I came in and had them do my onboarding form. Who built this dashboard for you? Where can I get one for all of my clients? And that kind of secondary question was the magic moment for where can I get one of these for all of my clients? And my buddy had basically stepped in and said, well, I'm the data guy. I'm now the data guy for this company. I'm happy to build dashboards for all of your other clients so they can be as organized as we are. And within a couple of weeks, that had kind of turned into a business relationship. And then we just said, well, if this SEO agency needs this PPC agency needs this, it's likely that many, many others also do.
So if you were to boil it down, you're working with agencies and then e-commerce brands. Now, for those people in e-commerce listening, triple whales often what comes to mind based on dashboards, data in those dashboards, great metrics. What would be your pitch as to why your system would be a better alternative to, say, a triple whale type of dashboard?
So a lot of people, where there's a lot of different spectrums of kind of customer awareness and where people are in terms of the solution journey for data and analytics and dashboards. But the triple whale is a great solution. It's fairly expensive for SaaS, right? You need to set things up correctly. It just only has certain platforms in it. So one thing we hear from kind of one category of customer is they actually have too many dashboards. So this is actually likely true for your triple whale user, right? There's someone who knows what dashboards are. They know how to make them. They know how to get them in a bunch of places. And your triple whale user is probably checking Klaviyo, and then they're checking triple whale, and then they're checking a bunch of other sources. Then they have their warehousing and their logistics and their supply chain. Maybe they also have financial data. So we step in as the biggest benefit of us over a triple whale for that specific type of customer is complete aggregation and then also customizability. So all these tools are good if you know how to use them, and two, if what your goals are also the same goals as the platforms, right? It's kind of when you've outgrown the tools and you want to color outside of the lines and do something that the platform doesn't enable you to do and integrate a data source that isn't part of the platform. That's usually when a brand who's already used triple whale would want to switch and work with us instead. It's, do you want truly everything in one place? And do you want to actually have the ability to manipulate your raw data in a data warehouse? Do you want to pave a path forward for advanced like machine learning and AI on your data? And so I'm not intimately familiar with actually what goes on behind the scenes in Triple Whale, which is a level of research I need to spend more time on. But the primary benefit is we are not a SaaS platform yet, right? We're not a SaaS platform. We are consultants. We are a fractional chief data officer. We are, a senior data engineer on your team as needed. And so there are custom things we can do to put everything in one single dashboard instead of like, okay, well now I know Triple Whale is pretty good for Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and maybe TikTok or whatever it is. But if you also want to integrate everything else that you do and have it all be in one place, you're not going to be able to accomplish that. And I don't know. I'm definitely under-researched on what specifically we do differently than Triple Whale, but I wouldn't say that's like our exact ideal scenario.
Are you using a standard model and then customizing just little bits of it off for different customers, or are you starting from scratch with every customer?
We're definitely not starting from scratch with every customer. We have our own subscription to it's an ETL tool, which stands for extract, transform, and load, right? So you're retrieving the data from wherever it exists. So let's go with Facebook, for example. You're retrieving your data from Facebook, you're transforming it. So that's extracting. You're transforming it into a more user-friendly format for someone to like make SQL queries with. And then you're loading it into, your data warehouse, which is what is queried to create visualizations. And we pay for an enterprise subscription to something called Adverity, which has 600 or so connectors to the most popular data sources when it comes to marketing. So it's going to have your top 10 most popular email marketing platforms, your top 10 most popular ad platforms, your top 10 most popular CRMs, etc. And for most people, about 60 to 70% of their data sources that they come to us with are going to already have a connector built with Adverity. Right? Just like when you go and use Triple Whale, or when you go and use Glue.io, or when you go and use Polar, they're going to have about 60 to 70% of your data sources. So it's pretty easy for us to build those core, I don't want to say easy, I want to say straightforward and somewhat templatized. Like if someone's just saying, hey, I want to see all my Google Ads campaigns, that's very straightforward. We just need to swap out one campaign ID for another campaign ID or account ID for account ID and make sure that we're computing the statistics according to the methodology that they care about. But then the other 30% is, say someone's using an email platform like Constant Contact, which actually has a pretty, in my opinion, difficult API to work with. We have already built our own custom connector, not hosted anywhere, not on an Adverity, nowhere you can purchase off the shelf. And that's like the custom piece. Or maybe someone's using, they're drop shipping their products to some other website and they're sending them just a CSV file every week, right? I don't think there's like an easy way to integrate order data from this random affiliate into like your Triple Whale dashboard, but we'll build a custom, cloud hosted Python script that will read that CSV file from your email every week, automatically organize the data into whatever way to compute whatever statistics you care about, and have that be visible in your dashboard with an indicator telling you the last time it was updated. So it's that getting people from 80% to 100% is where we are. Because definitely, and I don't want to pretend like I don't know these no-code tools exist or these low-code tools exist. They exist. They work well. They get you to about, if you're small brands, maybe start there. But once you're actually having to make more sophisticated decisions and you're using a huge variety of tools, it's kind of just like an asymptotic problem that all of these platforms are going to do their best to get the majority of the integrations done for you. But if you want to close the gap from 85% to 100%, you're going to want someone who knows how to write code on your team. But you probably don't need them full time.
Got it. I was speaking with someone who was a data science entrepreneur. He created an app and a program for real estate, leasing, all that kind of stuff. Had a really cool back-end dashboard that was tracking the change in price of certain rental properties and pretty much letting people know, do you need to raise the price, drop the price, etc. And he said his biggest roadblock was finding out how great the relationships between leasing agents and homeowners or association owners was. What was your biggest real life obstacle when creating your business that got in the way that surprised you?
I'm really not the technical. I am technical. I got a computer science degree and made good grades. But in this business, one of us has to put our head down, be in a quiet room and build dashboards. And one of us has to go on podcasts and tell the world about what we do and send prospecting emails and get on sales calls. So I've taken that role. Like we both have the capacity to do both. But if we were to say on a spectrum, who's more of the engineer and who's more of the salesperson, that's the way things have fallen. I'd have to ask Sean what has frustrated him the most with building the dashboards. Really, in terms of marketing, like we're not solving unsolved problems most of the time. Right, there's something that's tricky. Maybe an API has a rate limit of, and this is nerd stuff here. That's not super applicable. But let's say if you have a database of 50,000 contacts, and the API only lets you make 10,000 API calls per day, then you have to find the way that they do. But there's fields are only correlated with, again, this little stuff like that happens where you have to figure out how to like within an allowable amount of API calls per day, still synchronize daily while still extracting all the information that you want. Stuff like that comes up all the time. But this business is not beyond our skill set, right? It's not like we're not operating at the outer edge of what we know how to do. We're operating pretty well within our comfort zone of like the majority of the work for us, because this is not groundbreaking software engineering. This is just, we know how to code, and this stuff is easy to do for someone who knows how to code, but effectively impossible for someone who doesn't know how to code. But really the technical work's pretty straightforward for us. Like Sean's background, he's a full-time, and still, right, we're still in the bootstrapping phase where he has a full-time job. He's a full-time, big cloud and data engineer for an MIT research lab. So like we can code. Like that's not the problem. The bottleneck has definitely been on my side of the business, figuring out, to Ophir's point, like who specifically needs this? Like what parameters can I put into Google to find an agency that has or has not automated their data yet? There's nothing that really tells me from an agency's front end of their website whether or not their data is organized or disorganized. Like there's no signal, right? They might say that they're data driven, but that doesn't actually tell me if that's automated or if that's passive, or if they care about having it automated. And same thing with an e-commerce brand. I haven't found a signal that tells me, yes, so, this brand uses a lot of data sources. A lot of them are uncommon. But until that doesn't tell me who on their team manages reporting and how they manage reporting. So it's like getting through to the other side and like understanding under the hood of the business and figuring out how to effectively find the people most receptive to our skill set and like most in need of what we do, while also, of course, having the budget to pay us the rates that we think that we're worth, etc. So finding that in startup parlance, to bring it back to kind of a good buzzword, finding that product market fit has been the challenge, because we know from the customers that we've worked with that what we do is incredibly valuable for them. It saves them a ton of time. It shortens the amount of time it takes them to make decisions, helps them make better decisions.
I'm sure you guys spent some time on LinkedIn, and the last couple of weeks we've been seeing companies with dramatic amounts of layoffs. So naturally it's an environment where people are cutting costs. Is that affecting prospecting for you? Are you seeing stresses of other companies trying to limit operational expenses of which you would be contributing to?
So my perspective here, and I don't want to get too metaphysical, but the world's a really big place, like a really big place, right? There's a lot of people right now who are having their best year ever. And there's a lot of people right now who are having layoffs. It really depends like who you are and where you are. There's always someone losing money. There's always someone who screwed up. There's always someone who like misprojected for the scenarios. But there's also people who built reserves and are going to hire like crazy right now and are going to reinvest, kind of zig when everyone's zagging. And there's millions of companies out there, and there's millions of entrepreneurs, and there's trillions of dollars flowing daily. And some companies are not in good shape right now, but others are. And we're trying to fund the ones that are. At the end of the day, it's like we're not this $1 million package where most of our retainers are low several thousands of dollars per month. And if a company needs this service, they're happy to pay for that because like they need it. And what I'll say is, in terms of being like, let's say, recession proof, if what you're doing has a clear line to providing more revenue, right? It's like, hey, you spend $300,000 per month on ads, and you're not even tracking the effectiveness of those across these platforms. What if we cut your ad budget by, X several thousands of dollars for this couple month period we work together, so that now you have a tool to see where it's going? You don't think that business is going to like spend money 10 to 20% better and like profit, tens of thousands of dollars from having made that allocation? So if what we're doing is tied to a direct return on investment, then, it doesn't really matter what the macro environment looks like. And then on the same page, in terms of like consulting and being a consulting business, it would be very difficult if our goal was to like kind of be I don't know if you all know what r/overemployed. It's like a subreddit for people who try to have multiple full-time jobs. Multiple cushy full-time jobs at once is what r/overemployed is. So it's like people who are like, yeah, basically you get a job, you work really hard for like 3 weeks, then you kind of coast and just like show up to meetings, and you can realistically, if you're smart, right, you can have like 5 of those at once. If that was our approach to making money right now, we'd be in trouble, because it's like the goal there is like provide the least possible value while not getting fired. And companies basically are cutting off people who are doing not a ton of value, but like kind of just mooching salaries. But what they are doing is like, hey, you could hire a full-time software engineer who would just oversee this, but that's going to cost you $10,000 per month. And realistically, they're not going to be that busy once it's finished. They're just going to like need to answer Slack messages when something breaks. Or it's a very unbundled offer, and you're also going to have to pay for their healthcare, and you're going to have to pay for the benefits, and you can't just like fire them without notice, without like things happening. Or you have a consultant who's just going to charge you exactly for this project and nothing else, and no healthcare costs, and you don't have to pay, right? You don't have to pay the employment tax for us either, right? We just have to pay our own taxes. You're just going to.
It's awful.
Exactly. So it's actually cost effective. It's like no less businesses need this done than did before. and it's kind of a more attractive option for getting it done.
It's interesting you mentioned, for example, the employment taxes. I was actually running data on some of our warehouse staff today to get an understanding of what's our capacity like, capacity per individual, throughput, and also like packaging per or cost per packaging generally in units produced here. And if you consider overlapping the payroll taxes on established wages, you're looking at something like a 15% bump. So it's interesting when you're a business considering someone's wage, you're really looking at that wage plus about a 15% bump. But to move on to a point that you actually mentioned that I like a lot, you talked about building a business during a difficult recessionary period, which some would argue is what we're currently seeing. Warren Buffett has an interesting quote, which I'll paraphrase, which is, we'll make investment decisions based on the asset rather than just the macro environment that we are in. That's a philosophy that my partners and I have always taken within our business, because what you're saying is exactly true, right? You have millions of businesses. There's always customers. There's always demand. It's just a matter of who's actually operating successful businesses, well-run businesses, and who's not running with their heads cut off. And like you describe, data is so important. If you're not understanding the inflows and outflows of your business, you're running with your head cut off. So basically, what you describe, I like it a lot. It's a dashboard that really makes business operators make successful, smart, and financially sound decisions as they try to navigate a really difficult environment right now.
So essentially, sewing heads back on.
Sewing headspace. It's funny. You made a point there. I'm trying to remember where I was going with this, but yeah, basically, so for the previous 2 years, I was working in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency before starting this. And, on Twitter, there's basically, X guys with X white paper just raised, I don't know, some egregious amount of money, $13 million, $50 million, $200 million. And you'd hope that those were for like 5 years of runway, not like 6 months of runway. And so like for the entire period of like, I don't even know what to call it, but let's call it just like 2020, just the year of 2020. There was like billions of dollars of capital raised at these companies to provide businesses with several years of runway to get things done. Not like, so just because like checks have dried up a little bit for like raising money doesn't mean there aren't all of these businesses that raised money in the better times that haven't spent it all yet. Like they didn't spend it all yet. Like the money's still there. Maybe they'll be a bit more cautious with how they invest their money. But if they raised for like several years of runway, we're still well within that window.
I like how you mentioned that. My network at my university at USC, it seemed like every week I'd be hearing this person raised 10 million, this person raised 5, this person 7.5. And that was, it was getting poured on everybody for the most basic ideas. And the chickens are coming home to roost now. So that surprised me, because you would have individuals that were not, so to say, people you'd expect to raise money and start businesses. And even those running with their heads cut off are getting funded.
Were you seeing that there were common characteristics between these people getting funded, or was it some type of reputability in the network of USC, or what do you think was providing them with that ability to fund?
I think when you're operating in a cheap rate environment, you're going to have malinvestment, or the idea that the cheap subsidized money at low rates is going to follow bad investments. I think that's one factor of it. I think there's definitely also a real fear of missing out. Mm-hmm. And again, I think my philosophy is that it always goes back to cheap money. You have an environment that's created where it's going to manifest itself. Again, it's a bad investments, because there's not running a business is all surrounded and dependent upon how well can you run the business. Are you cash flow positive, and how well do you deal with cash flow? And when you don't have those stresses, because, for example, you have a tremendous amount of capital raised, right? When you run within the confines of bootstrapping, you learn to operate a business effectively. And in my philosophy, if you're not operating in that method, you're doomed to fail. And that's why you see so many venture-backed companies fail, because they don't generally have stresses from day one. So they think the good times are going to be the times in perpetuity. And raising money in good times is easy, but surviving as a business in bad times is really damn difficult.
So would you say that because so much mal money was given, that there is a tech bubble? And if there is, do you think it's popped, or do you think we haven't even seen that yet?
I don't feel comfortable making that decision or that projection out into the future. But what you can hang your hat on is that we've seen a tremendous amount of deflating in asset prices, except for real estate much, at least in the South Florida area. If you consider A number of tech businesses are down 80%, 90%. And are we there completely yet? I have no idea. Louis, you have an opinion on that?
My opinion is I just don't try to make bold predictions. It's like, I don't know. I'm staying in my lane.
Don't timestamp this.
I have a thesis that there are a lot of businesses that are doing very, let's call them, I don't want to say caveman, but very non-modern data management techniques, right? They're still in Excel files. They're not tracking anything. And I think that they would benefit from what I have to sell. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. Like, there's no, to the things that don't affect me, right? This is like, I'm very, very much taking to heart, and I can speculate on the question with a very uninformed opinion if you'd like me to. But my takeaway is like, I'm very much in blinders mode. Like anything that's just not in service of my primary goal, which is like getting monthly revenue up to a point that can afford both, myself and my co-founder full time, like paying ourselves what the market rate is for someone with our skill set, and then growing the business and bring on more partners. Anything that's not that, or is like not relevant to that, like I don't know. It's below my, as Chamath says, right? It's below my line. So like, there might be a tech bubble. I don't know. I'm just like, I got one goal right now, and it's like to find people who need what I have and to get in front of them. If there's a tech bubble or not, what I can speculate on in terms of like what you were saying about kind of like the startup founders and like thinking times are good when just the cash is free flowing. Like from our perspective, like the reason we haven't wanted to raise money for what we're doing is like genuinely would not have had a good use for it. Like maybe there've been a couple of tools that like would have been nice to have had that we didn't. So like we're literally at the point like a couple months ago where we're like, do we buy an extra $12 per month email domain so we can send an extra 50 cold emails per day without like our stuff going to spam, right? Like the decision of like an extra $12 of monthly expenses was something that was worth having a conversation, right? Which is like a very, let's call it scarcity mindset to come from. But at the same time, if we had $100,000 in the bank, we would have been like, which is a very modest amount in terms of like the numbers we were talking about. Like, let's just hire an SDR for $60K a year plus, let's just hire a full-time SDR, $60K per year plus whatever commission on sales. And that would be, we could have afforded that, but then, why did we feel like we needed that person? It's like, do we actually know exactly what we're selling and who we're selling it to? Not quite yet, right? Do we know exactly who this guy should be prospecting? Like, why would we? That's kind of what happens with a lot of these startups is they're like, let's raise a bunch of money so that we have time to figure things out. And that's a fine approach, right? That is a fine approach. But like mine is like, why would we raise other people's money when we don't even have it figured out yet? It's like, if you do have so Sean and I, my business partner, we had a previous startup together where we sold an energy drink, right? And we had a formulation, we had a cans, we had a brand, we like had made several, I think at least $10,000 worth of sales. And we like made 10,000 units and that was done. Like we had quote figured that out, right? It's like we put this in a can and we put it in this place and people buy it if they like it. Like that was, okay, we need to go to the next step. We need more money. Like it is impossible to get to the next step without $200,000 so we can get minimum order quantities for like an actual co-packer. But for us, it's like the thing holding us back from the next step is that we have not dialed in our offer to be a no-brainer such that when we email it to the right person, they get on a meeting and want it. Like we need to have that figured out versus if we went to a gym, like we kind of already had product market fit with the previous startup. We just like, we're kind of too young, not too young in terms of like making an excuse. We just didn't want to do it. We just lost enthusiasm and we're like, what this takes is something we don't want to go through. But right now, I just think, why would I raise money when I still, like we have clients that pay us, and again, like I said, it's a great value exchange. But in terms of if I'm confident that if I email 1,000 people where X, Y, and Z are true about them, there's no way less than 200 of them are going to want to book a meeting with me. Like until I'm at that point where I know I have a pain point so well defined and I have a solution so clear as an answer to that, like we have no business raising extra people's money because it's just going to make us more careless with like how we spend money until we have things figured out.
How did you feel that lessons learned in your energy drink venture taught you how to run your business and convert those lessons into your software business?
So one of our mantras is like equity is fake, right? Like we want to pay people along the way. So we're not like that was very much like a very traditional college student type startup, right? Like anyone and anyone that we knew who wanted to help in some capacity were like, small points of equity, work for free, blah, 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 blah. Here's like 0.5% because you helped us at this fair. Like you stood at the table next to me. Here's 0.5% of a percent. I don't know. Like it was just very silly. And like, it's fun, right? It's good fun, but it's like most of those people, right? It was worth nothing. And they just ended up working for free. And we're like, well, I don't really feel good about having like, again, we were also, use the word kids in air quotes. We didn't know what we're doing. They didn't know what we're doing. Everyone learned from experience. No one's like truly worse off for what happened. But now it's like, hey, if you want to help us, like if I have a friend who like wants to help, there's no promises. It's like, what do you need to be paid to do this? Like, we're going to give you that money today. We're going to shake hands. And if we're going to work again, you're going to tell us how much it's going to cost. We're going to pay you that. And then we're going to shake hands and we're going to do that again. Like, if we want it, unless someone like, we kind of don't want any business partners. So like the equity thing was a big lesson. We're just like, no giving out small points of equity for people who like want to help out, because first of all, like, we're not built, maybe down the line we'll sell this business, but right now it is not like we want to operate this for a long time. So there's no like value to like fake equity. And then the other thing is kind of like extracting the value from like to ourselves along the way. It's like we want to pay ourselves well as this business grows, rather than like paying ourselves nothing and like hoping to one day have like a big exit. So that's just not our strategy.
To second that, we took 4 years of continuously reinvesting into our business before we actually started actually taking out a penny. What you're saying is exactly right. It's either bootstrap, and in the CPG world or the direct-to-consumer world, you're right. You need to pay a tremendous amount of inventory costs, and then you set up a warehouse or you need a 3PL. And it's a model that does require a lot of capital, and it's those with capital that generally do succeed.
So Louis, to change course a little bit, we talked offline a little bit about your concept of the impossible list. What is that to you, and how did you apply that into your work?
The impossible list is very much a borrowed concept, and I think that's like an important hurdle. I'm working on an essay or a Twitter thread called like a collection of unlearnings that good students need to go through to like be effective entrepreneurs. And one of them is like the necessity of originality. It's just not helpful to think you need to come up with everything from scratch, that like you need to have the novel insight. But really, like, the best entrepreneurs copy pretty shamelessly, and they just give credit when relevant, right? When fair. So the impossible list is a framework I copied without any modification from someone else. And it doesn't matter though, because it's free. It's just an idea, borrowing an idea so it can be more effective and without any shame for doing so. But for whatever reason, the school system like makes you think that's just like an evil, immoral thing to do. So there's someone named Joel Runyon. I've actually interviewed him on my podcast, and very cool guy. He created the impossible list, as far as I can tell. And it's effectively just a combination of a to-do list and goals and a bucket list, kind of with the mentality that when you put something on the list, you might think it's impossible, but over time, having it on the list, checking in with the list frequently, you find that, and maybe like picking a couple things from the list to make near-term intentions to cross off the list, eventually you continue to whittle away with things that you thought were impossible have actually now been things that you've done. And, or like the David Goggins kind of word for this, like the cookie jar, right? Like you put it in the cookie jar. And I found this when, in 2018, there's another online content creator personality called Thomas Frank. And Thomas had a really well formatted impossible list, where it's just a list of like kind of a nested bullet list, meaning like a bullet would be, run my first 5K, right? And then a nested bullet under that would be run my first 5K in under 30 minutes. And then you cross that off when you do that. And then run my first 5K in under 26 minutes. And then cross that off. And then you write run my first 5K in 20 minutes. And then that one stares at you from the list for several years. At least that's been my experience. I've not crossed that one off yet. But the idea is basically continuing to, in all the buckets of life that are important to you to make progress, it's kind of an added degree of intentionality to a bucket list, because a lot of people like make a bucket list once, then very rarely do they like represent it in front of them and then like look at it and be like, what can I get done soon? But then the other thing is like you knock something off and then you up the ante. You don't have to do that, right? There's a lot of philosophy that could be had in terms of like growth for the sake of growth, and everything all the time is not quite good. Like a lot of people make the impossible list, 5K, half marathon, full marathon, Ironman, ultra marathon, whatever. And I'm like, is that necessary? Like, that's not why I created the list. I didn't create this list to become an ultra endurance athlete. At the end of the day, like I made some pretty substantial personal progress just from like completing the first 5K, the first 10K, the first half marathon. But like I have other goals on there that are like, bench press 300 pounds. And you don't see many like ultra marathoners who can bench press 300 pounds. So it's like you have to, at a certain point, like be content with the level of progress in a specific domain. But I've been maintaining this list pretty consistently since 2018 and continuously like putting something on the list, whatever my goals are in terms of, right, fitness has been a big one. I've only listed fitness examples, social examples, life experiences I want to have. So like I went to Alabama, so like I wanted to go to a lot of cool college football games over the years. So like going to a national championship, I thought that was cool. Going to one that we won was also cool. Doing that twice was just unnecessary. But I actually didn't attend the second time.
I'm a Gator, so I'm starting to hate this conversation.
But I actually didn't attend the second one that we won. But as far as professionally, right, I've put like personal revenue milestones, like, make my first dollar from the internet, make my first $10 from the internet, make my first $1,000 from the internet, make my first. And then some of them are very aspirational, like make $10,000 in a single hour on the internet. Like I haven't done that yet, but like that's a cool aspiration. And make $100,000 in a single month. And like you read books, so it's like, well, other people are doing it. Like they're not really, from what I can tell, these other people aren't any smarter than me. Don't have anything I don't have, besides just came up with a better business system already. And it's just been a series of progressively increasingly difficult goals that I bring to my attention frequently. And I personally share my list publicly. I have it on a website, louisshulman.com/impossible. And for the most part, it's just been a really effective conversation starter. Like, there's not like a huge degree of accountability. I don't have someone who like looks at it every week and is like, hey, I haven't really seen anything crossed off in a while, but it is cool to share. And then people like look at my website, get a sense of like, I'm going to use the word accomplishments in air quote, things I've done over time, a sense of like the journey I've gone on. And it communicates like, I try to put very few things on that list that seemed easy when I put them on the list. Like at the point when I put them on the list, like they did seem like a stretch. And some of them now might seem like, oh yeah, the 5K, just go outside and run for half an hour. Like anyone can do that. But like I literally, before I made that list, had never done a 3-mile run in my whole life. And so it's a very cool personal record of like, you can go, you can make a lot of progress in a short amount of time. Most of your limitations are self-imposed and kind of, keep crushing.
To comment on that, I've actually got my half marathon on Sunday, Miami Marathon. So let's see how that goes, my first half marathon. I like for our listeners, I like that that's such an actionable mindset framework. And I'm going to steal a little bit of that. I like that. To wrap up this show, we like to always ask about your experiences, obviously, with your back against the wall, difficult things that you've had to overcome. What would you say in your life or your career? You can take this any way how you'd like to. What is your no fear moment?
That's a really good question. And I'm trying to think, like, I know I've had a couple minutes of notice to stay ahead of the question, but it's a tough one because the thing with overcoming most fears is anytime you make it to the other side and live, you're like, wow, that really wasn't that bad at all. So like everything I've overcome, I'm kind of like, of course, that was trivial in hindsight, right? But like leading up to it, it was huge. I think, most recently leaving my last job was a great job. I worked for someone who I really, really admire still to this day. His name is Anthony Pompliano. He's a major thought leader in the crypto space. I think he's, a very smart person. I really respect the way he operates. I respected the way he conducted our business. He conducted meetings, like nothing but positive things to say about my time there. I mean, there was tons to learn from him. And basically it was, and again, these are very much, this is one of my, Sam is someone who works on the Orbit team, and he's a friend of mine, and he calls them like champagne problems. But I think in terms of like the people listening to this podcast, a lot of us are very privileged. It's like the most difficult thing I did. It's a very privileged thing to say that like the most difficult thing I've done recently was say no to a good opportunity for a better opportunity. And so like, I think there's obviously a lot of inherent privilege in that statement. But in terms of like, for a lot of people, like that is a difficult thing to do. Like objectively, it is not easy to like leave one good opportunity for another one. And that was difficult because I'm like, for when I graduated college, I wrote a list of like the 10 people I really want to work for. Like if I had to work a job and I don't have a business right off the bat, which ended up being the case, who are like the 10 people or companies I'd want to work for? And Pomp was like number 2 or 3 on that list. And it wasn't necessarily like a ranked list. But the point is like, he was someone like of all the people, 10 people in the entire world, like he was one of the people who I most admired, wanted to learn from, wanted to emulate in my career. And I was working for him very closely, emailing every single day, on phone calls every single day, like very closely working with him, like amazing mentorship opportunity. But it was not what I had previously to that. Like still that list of 10 people, of 10 mentors was my backup plan if I couldn't come up with a business idea. So I was like in this dream job scenario and ultimately did need to like turn it down to kind of pursue like higher calling, like whatever. And I think to frame it for people in terms of like leaving a good opportunity, right? Calling it like a first world problem, a champagne problem, to like have your most recent substantial achievements to have been like leave a good situation for another good situation, is literally just like reminding yourself that it's a first world problem. Like reminding yourself that if you are the type of person to have multiple good opportunities in front of you, if everything blows up in your face, you're still going to be okay, right? It's like like for me personally, it's like I graduated college with very good grades with a very difficult degree. Like the worst case scenario, like I had internships where I did very, very well. And, all of them wanted to hire me for like your traditional engineering role, right? Like making not a crazy amount of money, but like enough to pay rent and have a house and probably like not be in debt and like all those things. So it's like, it's Tim Ferriss calls it fear setting, but basically like the helpful framework for situations like that is just the reason I'm in this situation in the first place, where my best friend wants to hire me and effectively pay 95% of the business's revenue so that he can have me on his team. Like the reason I'm in that position in the first place and the reason I'm working for this dream mentor is because like I'm a competent person with skills who knows how to do things in a market that needs those things. Like I'm going to be okay, even if this was the wrong decision. Like I'm not going to regret it for the rest of my life. And what I will regret, right, the pain of rejection is much less worse than the pain of regret. and I will regret having not gone for the thing that I know more truly is what I want to do. So that would be like the no fear moment was leaving that. And those were some of like the ways I framed it that made the decision doable, or got me to the finish line for making the decision that I am very happy that I made.
Great mental points right there. Louis, thanks for hopping on. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys. Really appreciate being here.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the No Fear podcast, brought to you by House & Hughes. For more information about our show, visit thenofearpodcast.com. If you enjoy this podcast, be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok for insights into future episodes.